Abigail Whitmore didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply set down her flowers on the church steps, smoothed her skirts with steady hands, and walked away while the bells rang for her sister's wedding. The wedding that was supposed to be hers. If you've ever loved someone who chose someone else, stay until the very end, because this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of July the 14th, 1814. Abigail Whitmore rose before the sun. She had done this every morning for 3 years, not out of habit, but out of hope. There was something in the quiet hour before Boston woke that felt like promise. Like the world was holding its breath alongside her, waiting for the same thing she was waiting for. She dressed without help. She always had. Her mother had died when Abigail was 11, and she had learned early that waiting for someone else to button your dress was a luxury she couldn't afford. She did her own hair, pinned it back neatly, smoothed the front of her pale blue gown, and looked at herself in the small oval mirror above her washstand. 26 years old. 3 years of walking out with Nathaniel Carter. 3 years of Sunday dinners at his family's table of letters passed through his younger brother's hands, of long evenings on the Whitmore porch, while her father nodded off in his chair, and the fireflies came out, and Nathaniel held her hand like he meant to keep it. She looked at herself a moment longer than she usually did. Something felt different about this morning. She couldn't name it. She went downstairs. The Whitmore house sat on the respectable edge of Beacon Hill. Not the grandest street, not the poorest, but the kind of address that said a family had once been comfortable and was working hard to remain so. Her father, George Whitmore, had built a modest reputation as a land surveyor before his hands began to fail him. Now it was Abigail who kept the household accounts, managed the correspondence, and ensured that every bill was paid before the 15th of the month. Charlotte, her younger sister by 4 years, did not concern herself with bills. Charlotte concerned herself with her hair, her laugh, and the effect both had on any room she entered. Abigail had never resented her for it, or at least she had worked very hard not to. Charlotte was charming in the way that certain people simply were, without effort and without apology, and the world tended to forgive them everything on account of it. Abigail found her sister already at the breakfast table when she came down, which was unusual. Charlotte rarely rose before 9. "You're up early," Abigail said. Charlotte looked up from her tea. Something moved across her face, something Abigail couldn't quite read, and then it was gone, replaced by the familiar bright smile. "Couldn't sleep," Charlotte said. "It's too warm already." Abigail sat across from her and poured herself a cup. The kitchen girl brought in bread and a soft cheese and set it between them without a word. "Father's still resting," Abigail said. "His knee was bad last night." Charlotte looked out the window. "Are you all right?" "Of course." Charlotte turned back to her, smiling again. "Why wouldn't I be?" Abigail watched her for a moment. Then she picked up her bread and said nothing more. Nathaniel Carter was supposed to come at 2 o'clock. He had asked her 2 weeks prior if she might be available that afternoon. He had said it casually, in the way he said most things. Nathaniel was a man who wore his intentions loosely, who spoke with warmth, but rarely with urgency. He had smiled at her across the parlor and said, "I'd like to take you somewhere, Abigail, just the two of us. Would that suit you?" It had suited her very well. She had not allowed herself to assume. She was not the sort of woman who built castles from suggestions, but she had thought about it. She had thought about it more than she would ever admit to anyone in the careful hours of the night when the house was quiet and there was no one to see her face. 3 years was a long time. Long enough for a man to know his mind. Long enough for a woman to have earned an answer. By noon she had checked the clock 4 times. By 1, she had changed her gloves twice. By 1:30, she was sitting in the front parlor with a book she was not reading, listening for the sound of his horse on the cobblestones outside. At 2 o'clock exactly, she heard hoofbeats. She did not run to the window. She turned a page she had not read and waited until the knock came at the door. The kitchen girl answered it. Then there was silence. Then the girl came to the parlor doorway, looking strange, looking uncertain in a way that made Abigail's stomach turn over quietly. "Miss Whitmore," the girl said. There's a boy outside, from Mr. Carter's household. Not Nathaniel. A boy. Send him in, Abigail said. Her voice was perfectly steady. The boy was perhaps 12, a groom's son by the look of him, and he held his cap in both hands and would not quite meet her eyes. He held out a folded note. Abigail took it. She thanked him. She waited until she heard the front door close behind him before she opened it. The handwriting was Nathaniel's. She knew it as well as her own. Abigail. I find myself unable to keep our appointment today. Please accept my sincerest apologies. I hope we may speak very soon. N. Carter. She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it on the table beside her chair. She sat with it there for a long moment, her hands in her lap, looking at nothing in particular. I find myself unable. Not an explanation. Not a reason. Not a single word that told her anything at all. She picked up her book again. She did not read it. The news came to her 2 days later. Not from Nathaniel, not from Charlotte, but from Mrs. Hargrove, their neighbor, 3 doors down, who arrived at 11 in the morning with a plate of sugar cookies and an expression that mixed genuine sympathy with the particular brightness that certain people cannot suppress when they are the bearers of remarkable news. My dear Abigail, Mrs. Hargrove said, settling herself onto the parlor sofa without being invited. I want you to hear it from someone who cares for you. I thought it best. Hear what Mrs. Hargrove, Abigail said. The woman looked at her hands, then at Abigail, then at the cookies. Mr. Carter married your sister yesterday afternoon, she said, at the First Parish Church on Cambridge Street. A very small ceremony, I'm told. Very, very quiet. I don't believe there were more than a dozen guests. The clock on the mantel ticked. A cart passed outside on the street. Somewhere upstairs, Abigail's father coughed once in his sleep. I see, Abigail said. My dear. Thank you, Mrs. Hargrove, she said, for coming to tell me. That was very kind. She did not cry in front of Mrs. Hargrove. She served the woman tea, listened to another 10 minutes of carefully managed condolences, thanked her again at the door, watched her walk back down the front path, and then returned to the parlor and sat down in her usual chair. And then she sat there for a very long time. She was not a woman who came undone easily. She had learned over the years of keeping the house and managing the accounts and being the one who was steady while her father grieved and her sister glittered, that falling apart was something you could not always afford. You could feel every single thing that was happening to you. She was feeling it now. All of it at once, a kind of cold and comprehensive weight pressing through her chest. But you had to keep sitting. You had to keep breathing. You had to decide what you were going to do next. What she did next was go upstairs to her room, close the door, sit on the edge of her bed, and allow herself exactly 1 hour. She had learned this from her mother, or from her memory of her mother, which may not have been entirely accurate. Give yourself an hour, she remembered being told over some childhood grief she could no longer name. Feel everything in that hour, and then get up. She felt everything. Then she got up. Charlotte came home that evening. Abigail heard the door, heard the voices. Charlotte's bright and a little nervous, and beneath it, a lower voice, Nathaniel's voice, and she stood in the middle of the kitchen where she had been helping prepare supper, and she made herself very still for a moment. Then she walked out to the front hallway. They stood there together, Charlotte and Nathaniel still in their traveling clothes. Charlotte's face went pale the moment she saw Abigail. Nathaniel looked at the floor. Abigail, Charlotte said. Her voice had a strange high quality to it. We came to speak with you. We owe you an explanation. You don't owe me anything, Abigail said. Her voice was quiet and even. You're married. That's your business. Abigail, please. How long? Abigail asked. Charlotte blinked. What? How long were the two of you? She paused. Chose her word carefully. Involved before yesterday. A silence. It was Nathaniel who broke it, though he still would not look at her. Several months, he said. Low, ashamed. Not ashamed enough. I see, Abigail said. I know what this must feel like. Charlotte started. Charlotte. Abigail's voice was not unkind, but it stopped her sister flat. I'm going to ask you both to leave now. Father doesn't need to hear any of this tonight. But Go home, Abigail said. We can speak another time, not tonight. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen before either of them could say another word. She stood at the kitchen table with both hands pressed flat against the wood and listened to the sound of the front door closing. Then she finished helping with supper. Boston was not a forgiving city. This was something Abigail had always known, but had never had reason to understand quite so personally. In the weeks that followed, she felt the shift as a physical thing, the change in the way people looked at her on the street, the slight pause before her name was spoken, the conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She was not pitied exactly, or rather, she was pitied, but it was a pity that had judgment mixed into it, the kind that asks what a woman must have done wrong to be passed over in such a way. She was 26 and unmarried, and her sister had taken her intended, and there were people in Boston who could not help but feel that this said something about Abigail Whitmore that did not say something about Nathaniel Carter. She bore it with as much dignity as she could manage. She kept her appointments. She continued her work with the Women's Charitable Society on Tremont Street, where she organized clothing drives and helped write letters of appeal to wealthy donors. She managed her father's accounts. She walked with her chin up, but it was exhausting in a way she had not expected. Not the grief she had anticipated the grief, but the performance of being fine. The constant hourly quiet work of looking like a woman who had not had her life rearranged without her consent. Her father did not say much. He was not a man of many words under ordinary circumstances, and this situation seemed to have stripped him of what few he had. He would look at her sometimes across the dinner table with an expression that was pure helplessness, and she would smile at him, and he would look away. The only person who said anything useful was her Aunt Eleanor, who wrote to her from her farm in western Massachusetts 3 weeks after the news reached her. The letter said, "Come stay with me, not forever. Just until Boston remembers how to behave. The garden needs help, and I am too old to dig alone, and I find I miss your company very much. Come, Abigail. The city will still be here when you're ready to want it back." She went. She told her father she needed a change of air. She told the charitable society she would return by autumn. She packed one trunk and her mother's small writing case, and she took the westbound stage on a Tuesday morning in August, and she did not look back at Beacon Hill as the coach rolled away from it. She was not running. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. A woman who runs from something is different from a woman who walks deliberately toward something else. She was choosing. She was choosing Eleanor's garden and Eleanor's plain speech and the particular quiet of a farm in summer over a city that had decided without asking her that her value was contingent on a man's decision. She was choosing to go somewhere she did not have to perform being fine. She was choosing to go somewhere she could simply be. Benjamin Ashford was not supposed to be on that stage. He was a man who traveled by horseback when he could manage it, had done so for most of his adult life, through military campaigns in the South, and land negotiations across 3 states, and the general business of managing an estate that had been in his family for 2 generations. He was 41 years old, broad through the shoulders, quiet in the particular way of men who have learned that silence is frequently more useful than speech. He boarded the westbound stage at the last moment, arriving at the station with 2 minutes to spare and a leather satchel under one arm, and he settled himself across from Abigail Whitmore without particular attention. She was sitting very straight. Her hands were folded in her lap over a small traveling case. She was looking out the window at nothing, and there was something in her expression that he recognized without being able to name the look of a person who has recently made a very hard decision and is quietly making peace with it. He did not speak to her for the first hour of the journey. There were 2 other passengers, an older merchant who fell asleep within the first 20 minutes, and a young woman traveling with an infant who occupied herself entirely with the infant. The road was rough, the summer heat already asserting itself against the coach's windows, and they rattled along in the kind of silence that is either companionable or not depending on the people in it. At the first stop, most of the passengers stepped out to stretch. Abigail remained in the coach. She had brought a small book which she opened, but did not seem to read. When Benjamin climbed back in, he settled himself and said without preamble, "You don't have to look like that." She looked up from the book. Her eyes were direct gray, he noticed, with something careful behind them. "I beg your pardon," she said. "You've been sitting like you're waiting to be judged," he said. "There's no one here to judge you." A pause. She considered him. "You don't know me, sir," she said. "You have no idea what I've been sitting like." "That's fair," he said, and almost smiled. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she looked back at her book. "Benjamin Ashford," he said. "I'm heading out toward Deerfield, visiting a property." Another pause. Then, with the slight air of someone choosing to be civil when they might reasonably have chosen otherwise. "Abigail Whitmore," she said. "I'm heading to my aunt's farm, near Northampton." "Good country out that way," he said. "So I'm told," she said. "I've not been before." "You'll like it," he said. "Quieter than Boston." She looked up again. Something shifted in her expression, not softened exactly, but sharpened, as though he had said something that landed precisely. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" she said. "Your gloves," he said, "and the way you hold your shoulders." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's either very perceptive," she said carefully, "or very strange." "Probably both," he said. And this time he did smile. She did not smile back, but she didn't look away either. They did not talk much more that day. But something had changed in the quality of the silence between them. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but the silence of two people who have noticed each other and are taking quiet stock. At the second stop, when the merchant was lumbering out, and the young mother was wrestling with her child, and the step was slick from an earlier rain, Benjamin reached a hand back without thinking to steady Abigail as she descended. She didn't take it. She stepped down on her own with perfect steadiness, and then looked at him. "I've been managing steps on my own for some time," she said. Not sharply, just as a fact. "I see that," he said. They stood there for a moment in the afternoon heat. "I didn't mean anything by it," he said. "I know you didn't," she said, and something in her voice had gone quieter, less defended. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford. All the same." They parted at the crossroads. 2 hours later, his road went east toward Deerfield. Hers continued north toward Northampton. The coach stopped to let him off, and he collected his satchel and tipped his hat to the passengers generally, and then specifically to Abigail Whitmore. "Safe travels, Miss Whitmore," he said. "And to you, Mr. Ashford," she said. The coach rolled on. She did not look back, but she held the memory of the conversation for longer than she expected to. Not because it was remarkable, but because it was the first exchange in 3 weeks in which no one had looked at her like she was something to be pitied. Eleanor Whitmore was 63 years old and had lived alone on her farm for 11 years since her husband passed, and she had the particular quality of women who have been tested by life and come through it neither bitter nor broken, but simply very clear. She was thin and straight-backed, and she grew her own herbs and kept 6 chickens and had strong opinions about nearly everything and apologized for none of them. She met Abigail at the farm gate with a hug that was brief and firm and said more than a long speech would have. "You look tired," she said, pulling back to look at her niece's face. "I am tired," Abigail said. It was the first time she had admitted this to anyone. "Good," Eleanor said. "Tired means you've been fighting. Come in and eat something." The farm had a rhythm that was entirely different from anything Abigail had known in Boston. The work was physical in a way that she was not accustomed to: hauling water, tending the kitchen garden, mending fences alongside the farm's one hired hand, learning which herbs needed cutting back and which needed to be left alone. Eleanor ran the property with calm precision and expected Abigail to learn quickly, which Abigail did, because she had never been anything but capable when the situation required it. In the evenings after supper, they sat on the porch and Eleanor talked. Not about Charlotte, not about Nathaniel, not about Boston. She talked about the farm, about the neighbors, about a dispute with the county assessor over the East Field, about the book she was reading about her late husband, and the particular way he had laughed at his own jokes. And gradually, Abigail began to talk too. Not about the things that hurt. Not yet. Just talk. The way she had not had room to do in Boston, where every conversation felt monitored, where every word she said might be carried back to someone who would turn it into evidence of how she was or wasn't managing. Here she could say ordinary things and have them received as ordinary things. It was more restoring than she had expected. One evening, about 2 weeks into her stay, Eleanor set down her mending and looked at her niece directly. "Are you going to be all right?" she asked. Abigail was quiet for a moment. The evening insects were very loud. The last of the light was going gold in the west field. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was Eleanor, "But not the way I thought I would be." Eleanor nodded. "Tell me." "I thought?" Abigail stopped, started again. "I thought that if I was patient, if I was steadfast, if I managed everything correctly, it would be enough. That he would see it. That I would be seen. And you weren't." "No," Abigail said. "I wasn't." Eleanor picked up her mending again. "That's the thing about waiting for someone else to see your worth," she said. "It puts your worth in their hands, and some people can't be trusted to hold it." Abigail sat with that for a long time. "I'm not angry at him," she said finally. "I think that surprises me. I thought I would be. But mostly I'm angry at myself, for waiting so long, for not knowing that waiting wasn't that, it wasn't what I should have been doing." "What should you have been doing?" Eleanor asked. Abigail looked out at the darkening field. "Living," she said. "I should have been living." Eleanor said nothing, but she reached over and briefly covered Abigail's hand with her own. The weeks turned into months, and Abigail did not go back. Not because she was hiding, she was clear about this with herself, but because she was discovering slowly, and with some surprise, that she had things to learn that Boston had not had the time or space to teach her. Eleanor's neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Parsons, ran a small school for children of the surrounding farms. She mentioned in passing that she had no one to help her with the older children, whose reading she had neither the patience nor the range to improve. Abigail started going on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Within a month she was there 5 days a week. She had not known she was good at teaching. She had not known it was something that would make the particular hollow that had been residing in the center of her chest since July begin slowly to fill again. But there was something in the work. The daily patient-specific work of helping another person understand something they had not understood before that suited her in a way she had not anticipated. The children were not impressed by her because she was a Whitmore of Boston, or because she kept good accounts, or because she had spent 3 years walking out with a man who eventually chose someone else. They were impressed or not based entirely on whether she was useful to them, whether she could explain a thing in a way that made sense, whether she was patient when they struggled. She could be. She was. A letter came from Boston in October. Charlotte's handwriting on the outside. Abigail held it for a long time before she opened it. Abigail, I know you have every reason not to read this. I will say only that Father is well, that Mrs. Hargrove asks after you, and that Nathaniel and I will be in Northampton for a week in November, on account of a business matter of his. I thought you should know, in case you wish to. I don't know what I wished. I only wanted to say that I think of you. Charlotte Abigail read it twice. Then she put it in her writing case and went out to the kitchen garden and worked there for an hour, pulling the last of the summer plants that had gone to frost. She would think about Nathaniel being in Northampton, but not today. She thought about Benjamin Ashford more than made sense. Not constantly. Not in the breathless way she had thought about Nathaniel in the early years, when the sight of his name in a note could make her heart shift. This was different, quieter, more puzzled. She thought about the way he had said, "There's no one here to judge you." The matter-of-fact quality of it, like it was simply obvious. Like her not being judged was a condition of the world he moved in rather than a concession he was granting her. She thought about the way he had almost smiled. She thought, and then felt slightly absurd for thinking it, that she would not mind talking to him again. She did not know where Benjamin Ashford lived, or whether she would ever be in a room with him again, and she had other more immediate things to occupy her. But the thought was there, and she did not particularly try to dismiss it. November arrived cold and clear, and with it, Nathaniel Carter. She had not planned to see him. She had decided, in fact, that she would simply remain at the farm for the week he was in town and let the matter take care of itself. Eleanor had agreed without comment that this seemed sensible, but she went into Northampton on a Thursday morning to collect a package for Eleanor from the general merchant, and she was standing at the counter waiting when the door opened behind her and she heard his voice. She did not turn around. He saw her first and stopped. Then, Abigail. She turned. Nathaniel Carter had always been a handsome man, tall, fair, with the easy confidence of someone who had never had to work particularly hard to be liked. He looked the same. He looked entirely infuriatingly the same, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not quite name. "Nathaniel," she said. He crossed the room toward her. "I didn't know you were still in the area," Charlotte said. "I'm staying with Aunt Eleanor," she said. "Just temporarily." A pause. He looked at his hands. He had always done that. She remembered looked at his hands when he didn't know what to say with his face. "Abigail," he said. There are things I should have said. Things I owe you. An explanation. A proper." "You don't owe me an explanation, Nathaniel," she said. He looked up. "I do. What I did was, it was not you deserved better than a note." "Yes," she said. "I did." A silence. He was clearly waiting for her to say something more, to be angry, or to forgive him, or to collapse a little some response that would let him know how to feel. She recognized it the way people want the person they've wronged to give them something to work with. She didn't give him anything. "I hope you're well," she said. "Please tell Charlotte I said hello." She collected her package from the merchant, who had been very carefully looking at the wall behind his counter, and she walked out. She did not cry. She was not even particularly tempted to. What she felt walking back through the cold November air toward Eleanor's farm was something closer to clarity. She had loved him. She had been certain of it for 3 years. But standing there looking at him, she understood something she had not understood before. What she had loved had not been Nathaniel Carter as he actually was. What she had loved was the life she had imagined alongside him. The security, the belonging, the sense of being chosen. She had loved the idea of being finally, officially, irrevocably someone who was wanted. He had not chosen her. And what she felt now, walking away from him under the cold November sky, was not grief. It was something that felt just barely like the beginning of freedom. Freedom, Abigail discovered, was not a feeling that arrived all at once. It came in pieces. Small, unannounced pieces that appeared in the middle of ordinary moments the morning she realized she had gone 3 full days without thinking of Nathaniel. The afternoon. She laughed at something Mrs. Parsons said, and felt no guilt about it. The evening she sat on Eleanor's porch and watched the winter come in across the fields, and felt for the first time in longer than she could remember simply present. Simply here. Not waiting for anything. Not performing anything. Just here. It was a strange sensation for a woman who had spent 3 years oriented entirely around someone else's timeline. Eleanor watched all of this with the quiet attention of someone who has lived long enough to know that healing is not something you can rush or arrange. She did not ask Abigail how she was feeling. She did not offer opinions on Nathaniel or Charlotte unless Abigail invited them. She simply kept the house warm and the work steady, and trusted that her niece would find her footing. She was right. December arrived, and with it the particular beauty of a Massachusetts winter, hard frosts and bare trees, and the low flat light of a sun that rose late and set early, and turned everything briefly golden in between. Abigail had never spent a winter outside of Boston. She had not known how different silence could sound when there was no city underneath it. She helped Eleanor put up preserves. She continued at the school where one of her older students, a boy of 14 named Isaac, whose family ran a mill 3 miles east, had suddenly discovered that he could read and was making his way through every book Mrs. Parsons owned with an intensity that made Abigail's chest ache in the best possible way. She wrote long letters to her father, who wrote back in his careful, cramped hand, telling her about the weather and the house and very little else. She did not write to Charlotte. She was not ready. The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in late January. It was from a man named Gerald Whitmore, her father's younger brother, whom Abigail had met perhaps twice in her life. A thin, sharp-eyed man who had moved to Philadelphia 30 years ago and built himself a modest legal practice. He was not a person she thought about. She was not sure her father thought about him much either. The letter was addressed to her father, but Eleanor brought it to Abigail with a particular look on her face. "It came here," Eleanor said. "I think someone told him you were staying with me." Abigail opened it. The language was legal and careful, and took 2 full paragraphs to arrive at its point. But the point when it came was this. Abigail's maternal grandfather, a man named Robert Hale, whom Abigail had never known, had died the previous November in Virginia. He had left a will. In that will, he had left a property, a working farm of considerable acreage outside of Charlottesville, not to Abigail's mother, who had predeceased him, but to her eldest granddaughter. Abigail. She read it twice. Then she sat down at Eleanor's kitchen table and read it a 3rd time very slowly. "Eleanor," she said. "I read it," Eleanor said. She was standing in the doorway with her arms folded. "I know I shouldn't have." Is this real?" "Gerald Whitmore is a real attorney," Eleanor said. "I have no reason to think it isn't." Abigail set the letter down on the table. A farm in Virginia. Her grandfather's land. Left to her, not to Charlotte, not to her father, not to anyone else. To her. "Why didn't father tell me about him?" she said. "About Robert Hale." "Your mother and her father had a falling out," Eleanor said carefully. "Before she married your father. A very old hurt from what I understand. She didn't speak of him, and your father respected that. And now he's left me his land." "It appears so." Abigail looked at the letter for a long time. "I don't know what to do with a farm in Virginia," she said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "But you could learn." She wrote to Gerald Whitmore that same afternoon. She wrote to her father 2 days later a longer and more difficult letter, asking him why he had never told her. His reply, when it came 3 weeks later, was the most honest thing he had ever written her. An admission that he had kept the secret partly out of loyalty to her mother, and partly, she understood reading between the lines, because he had not known what to do with the information himself. Robert Hale had written to him once, shortly before Abigail's mother died, asking to see his granddaughters. Her father had not replied. "I was wrong not to tell you," he wrote. "I think I was afraid of what it might change. I am sorry, Abigail. Whatever you decide, I will support it." It was more than she had expected from him. She wrote back and told him she loved him and that she was going to Virginia. She did not go immediately. There were things to arrange, and she was not a woman who moved carelessly. She stayed through February, finished the term at Mrs. Parsons' school, helped Eleanor with the early spring work, and spent the evenings educating herself as thoroughly as she could about what it meant to manage a working property. Eleanor had books on land management. She had books on Virginia soil. She had, as it turned out, a correspondence with a woman in Charlottesville named Martha Bryce, who knew the Hale property and had written to Eleanor at Abigail's request with a frank and detailed account of its current state. The farm had been running without a clear owner for several months. The hired men were still working it. There were 4 of them, long employed, reliable by Martha Bryce's account, but they needed direction, and the spring planting decisions couldn't wait much longer. Abigail read Martha Bryce's letter so many times that she had it nearly memorized. "You're not afraid," Eleanor said one evening, watching her niece make notes at the kitchen table. "I'm terrified," Abigail said without looking up. "Good," Eleanor said. "Terrified means you're taking it seriously." She arrived in Charlottesville on a Thursday afternoon in late March, having traveled by stage to Richmond and from there by hired coach. She was 27 years old. She had never managed a property of any consequence. She knew no one in Virginia, and she was carrying her grandfather's will in her traveling case, along with 3 letters of introduction from Gerald Whitmore and a list of questions she had written over the course of 4 nights that covered 2.5 pages. Martha Bryce met her at the property gate. She was a stout, practical woman of perhaps 50, with a manner that was blunt in the way of people who have too much to do, to waste time being indirect. She looked Abigail up and down with the frank assessment of someone sizing up a new piece of equipment, And then she said, "You're younger than I expected." "I am," Abigail said. "Does that concern you?" Martha Bryce considered. "Not if you're willing to learn. I have a list," Abigail said, and held up the 2.5 pages. Martha Bryce looked at the list. Something moved across her face that might have been respect. "Come inside," she said. "I'll start at the beginning." The next 6 weeks were the hardest of Abigail's life, and also quietly the most clarifying. She made mistakes. She made them, quickly corrected them, and moved on. She learned the names of the hired men. Thomas, who was foreman and had worked the land for 20 years. His younger brother Will, who was slow-speaking, but could read a field better than anyone Martha Bryce had ever known. A man named Eli, who was not given to conversation, but whose knowledge of the tobacco crop was encyclopedic. And a boy of 17 named Samuel, who had come with the property and was desperately eager to prove himself useful. She treated them straightforwardly. She asked questions she did not know the answers to, and listened when they spoke. She did not pretend to authority she had not yet earned, but she did not diminish the authority. The land was hers, the decisions were hers, and she made them as clearly and as fairly as she could with the information available to her. Thomas, who had been polite but watchful for the first 2 weeks, came to her one morning in late April with his hat in his hands and said, "Miss Whitmore, I want to say we were worried when we heard the property was going to a woman from Boston. We figured—" He stopped. "Well, we figured wrong." "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "I appreciate that." "The East Field needs rotating this year," he said. "I've been wanting to say it for 2 seasons, but didn't know who to say it to." "Then let's talk about the East Field," she said. They stood in the morning air and talked about the East Field for half an hour. And when they were done, she had learned more about soil exhaustion and crop rotation than she had known existed as topics, and Thomas had left looking like a man whose opinion had been heard, which was exactly what he was. The news from Boston arrived in May. It came through her father, passed along with the careful neutrality of a man who was not sure how his daughter would receive it. Charlotte was expecting a child. Nathaniel had taken a partnership in a counting house. They were settled. They appeared by her father's cautious account to be managing. Abigail read the letter over breakfast and then set it aside. She found to her own mild surprise that it did not wound her as she had expected it might. The news landed, and then it moved through her, and then it was simply information, a fact about people she had known, who were living their lives in a city she had left. What she felt was not indifference. She was not so cold as that. She felt a complicated layered, some residual sadness for the version of herself who had waited and believed and been disappointed, and some genuine uncomplicated wish that Charlotte would be all right. And beneath all of it, steady and quiet, the recognition that her own life was happening right now on this piece of Virginia land in the morning air, and she did not want to miss a moment of it because she was looking backward. She wrote to her father. She told him she was glad they were well. She asked after his knee. She did not write to Charlotte, not yet. It was Martha Bryce who first mentioned Benjamin Ashford. They were going over the accounts one evening in June. Abigail had taken over the accounts herself, as she had always managed numbers with more confidence than most other things, and Martha said in the offhand way she had of delivering significant information, "You know the Ashford property borders your eastern fence line." Abigail looked up from the ledger. "I beg your pardon. Benjamin Ashford," Martha said. "His family's been in this county for 2 generations. Good land, well managed. He was a military man before he came back to take it over. Must be, 7 or 8 years ago now. He travels quite a bit on business, but he's been home this past month. I thought you should know since you share a fence line. Boundary disputes are easier to prevent than settle." Abigail looked at her for a moment. "Benjamin Ashford," she said. "You know of him?" Martha looked mildly curious. We were on the same stage last summer, briefly." "Well." Martha collected the account books and stood. "Then you already have an introduction. That's one less thing to manage." She left, and Abigail sat alone at the table with the ledger open in front of her, and a very particular expression on her face that she was glad no one was there to see. She did not go looking for him. She was clear about this with herself. She had too much work to manage and too recent a history of orienting herself around someone else to begin doing it again. She had the East Field and the tobacco crop and Samuel's reading lessons, which she had started in the evenings, because the boy had admitted with considerable embarrassment that he could barely manage his own name. But the fence line needed walking. That was a legitimate and necessary thing. Thomas had mentioned it 2 weeks ago. There was a section of the eastern boundary where the stakes had shifted and the spring rains had washed out part of the marking ditch, and it needed to be assessed before the question of where the Hale property ended and the next property began became a genuine dispute. She went on a Tuesday morning. She walked the fence line with Thomas, who was thorough and unhurried, and they had gone perhaps 3/4 of the eastern boundary when Thomas stopped and said quietly, "That'll be Mr. Ashford." She looked up. He was perhaps 30 yards off, moving along his side of the line on horseback, and he pulled up when he saw them. He was the same broad-shouldered, unhurried, the same quality of stillness about him that she had noticed on the stage. He swung down from the horse with the ease of a man who had spent a great deal of his life on horseback. He walked toward the fence line. She made herself stand still and let him come. He stopped on his side, looked at her for a moment, and then the corner of his mouth moved. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Ashford," she said. Thomas looked between them with the expression of a man who has suddenly understood that he is not quite necessary to this particular conversation. "You know each other," Thomas said. "We've met," Benjamin said. He was looking at Abigail with the same direct, undemanding attention she remembered. "I didn't know the Hale property had a new owner." "Since March," she said. "Robert Hale was your grandfather." "I never knew him," she said. "He left me the property in his will." Benjamin absorbed this without visible judgment. "How are you finding Virginia?" "Warm," she said. "And more demanding than I anticipated. But I'm managing." "I can see that," he said. And the way he said it, simply without inflation, landed the same way things had landed when he spoke on the stage. Like he meant exactly what he said, no more and no less. A pause. The morning was heating up around them. Thomas had found something very interesting to examine at the base of a fence post approximately 10 yards away. "The east boundary markers shifted," Abigail said. "I wanted to walk it before any questions came up." "Sensible," Benjamin said. "I walked mine last week. There's a section about a 1/4 mile north where the ditch is nearly filled in. If you want, I can show you where I set the new reference stake. It'll save you trouble trying to work out the original line." She considered him. "That would be useful," she said. "Thank you." They walked the remaining 1/4 mile of the boundary together on either side of the fence, with Thomas trailing behind at a careful distance. Benjamin showed her the stake, explained where he had placed it, and why, asked 1 or 2 questions about the fill work on her side that were practical and specific, and showed that he had thought about the problem with some care. He did not ask her about Boston. He did not ask about her family. He did not try to explain her situation to her, or offer opinions on how she was managing, or imply in any way that her presence on this land was unusual or worth remarking on. He talked to her the way you talk to a neighbor. It was, she realized, the first time anyone had done that since she arrived in Virginia. When they parted at the end of the boundary, he tipped his hat briefly, not elaborately, and said, "If you have questions about the county, I'm generally around. Martha Bryce will know where to reach me." "Thank you," she said. He turned and walked back to his horse. She stood watching for a moment, and then turned and went back to work, and did not allow herself to think about it for the rest of the morning. She thought about it quite a bit that afternoon. June moved into July, and the summer of 1815 settled over Charlottesville, with a heat that was entirely different from anything Abigail had known in Massachusetts. It was thick and close and constant, and it demanded a different pace from everything, from the work, from the evenings, from the way a person moved through the hours. She adapted. She had been adapting to things all her life. The tobacco crop was coming in better than Thomas had projected in the spring, which gave her a cautious satisfaction. She had started a proper account system for the property. Not the rough ledger she'd inherited, but a clear, categorized record that she could read at a glance and understand. Gerald Whitmore had written to compliment her on the quarterly report she'd sent him, with a warmth that surprised her, as she had not previously thought of him as a person given to compliments. She had also written to Mrs. Parsons in Massachusetts, asking for recommendations of books suitable for teaching a 17-year-old to read. Mrs. Parsons had sent 3 along with a brief letter that mentioned without particular emphasis, but with what Abigail recognized as deliberate intention, that Isaac, her star student, had gone on to the county school and was doing very well. She read that part twice and felt something that was purely good. Samuel was progressing faster than she had expected. He was motivated in the intense particular way of people who have discovered something late and are determined to make up for lost time. He read with his whole face, brow-furrowed lips moving slightly, and when he got through a passage without stopping, he looked up with the expression of a man who has just won something. Again, he would say, and she would set him the next one. Benjamin Ashford came by the property on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-July. He rode up to the house directly, not with the tentative approach of someone uncertain of his welcome, but with the straightforward manner of a neighbor making a practical call. She was on the porch going over correspondence when she heard the horse, and she looked up and felt for one brief unguarded moment something shift in her chest. She was becoming very tired of that. She set her correspondence aside and stood. "Mr. Ashford," she said. "Miss Whitmore." He swung down, looped the reins around the post. "I heard in town that you've been having trouble with the mill wheel at the North Creek. I know a man who does that work well." She stared at him. "How did you hear about the mill wheel?" she said. "Thomas mentioned it to Will, who mentioned it to me," he said. "Small county." She looked at him for a moment. The mill wheel had been a source of sustained frustration for 2 weeks. It was old, and the gearing was worn, and she had asked 3 different people in town for a recommendation, and received 3 different mutually contradictory opinions. "Who is this man?" she said. "His name's Caleb Marsh. He's out near Stony Point, does good work, doesn't overcharge." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "I wrote down his name and where to send a message." She took the paper. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You wrote over here," she said carefully, "to bring me a man's name." "It's a hot day," he said. "I had reason to come this way anyhow." She almost said something, and then didn't. "Would you like some water?" she said. "Before you head back." "I wouldn't say no to that," he said. She brought water. He sat on the porch steps, not in the chair. She gestured toward, but on the steps, which she decided she liked about him, the lack of ceremony, and they talked for perhaps 20 minutes. He told her about the county, about the families who had been there longest, and the ones who had come more recently, and the particular dynamics of the land commissioner's office, which she would need to understand when she filed the corrected boundary survey. She asked questions. He answered them without making her feel that her not knowing was remarkable. At one point, she asked whether he had been long in Virginia after his military service, and he said, "I came back in 1807. My father had died, and the property needed someone to run it. I'd been in the South Georgia, then the Mississippi Territory for a time." "That's a long way from here," she said. "It is," he said. He turned his hat in his hands once in a slow rotation. "I thought for a long time that coming home meant giving something up, that there was more life out there than what a piece of land could offer. And now," she said. He looked at her. "Now I think I was wrong about what constitutes a life." A pause. The afternoon insects were very loud. A warm wind moved through the yard. "I think about that too," she said, quietly. "About what constitutes a life." He didn't ask her to elaborate. He just nodded once, as though that was a sufficient and complete exchange, and she found that she was grateful for it. When he left, tipping his hat from horseback, she stood on the porch and watched him go down the drive, and she thought, "This is a man who asks before he assumes." She didn't know yet what to do with that. The summer rolled on, and Benjamin Ashford came by the property 4 more times before August was out, each time with a reason. A question about the County Road Commission's survey markers, a recommendation for a new veterinarian when one of her horses went lame, a copy of the county agricultural report that he thought she might find useful. Each time staying no longer than 30 minutes, never without a practical purpose, never with anything in his manner that she could point to as anything other than neighborly. And yet, she was not a woman who misread rooms. She was not a woman who invented things that weren't there. She had done enough of that with Nathaniel, and she had learned in the quiet winter at Eleanor's farm to be honest with herself about the difference between what she hoped and what was actually happening. What was actually happening was that Benjamin Ashford came by her property with reasonable frequency and talked to her like a person of sense and went home. That was what was happening. What she felt about that was her own business, and she intended to keep it that way. But Martha Bryce, who missed nothing, said to her one morning in August, without looking up from the account she was reviewing, "You know he doesn't call on the Mercer property, or the Hawthorne property, or anyone else along the Eastern Road." Abigail looked at her. "I'm sure he has his reasons," she said. "I'm sure he does," Martha said, and turned a page. The letter from Charlotte arrived in the last week of August. It was longer than the first 4 pages, Charlotte's familiar flowing hand. The loops of her letters, slightly different from how Abigail remembered them, a little less free, a little more careful. As though she had revised it many times. She had not asked after the farm. She had not mentioned Nathaniel by name. She had written instead about their mother memories, that both of them shared a particular afternoon they had spent together as children, picking wild strawberries, a song their mother used to sing. And then, at the end of the 4th page, without transition or apology, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I want to say that first, so you know I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I don't know if I would have forgiven me. But I find that I keep thinking about you, and I keep thinking that you would not want me to keep suffering in silence, because you were never that kind of person, Abigail. You were always the kind of person who would rather know the truth than be protected from it. So here it is. I am not happy. I made my choice, and I have to live with it, and I will, but I am not happy. And I think I have known for some time that the only honest person in my life is the one I cannot write to. Until now." Abigail sat with the letter for a long time. Then she folded it and put it in her writing case and went out to check on Samuel's reading progress, because she had learned that when things were too large to process, immediately a small and specific task was often the best medicine. Samuel was working through a passage from one of Mrs. Parsons' books, a straightforward story of a man who built a house from nothing on land he had earned. He stumbled twice, then found his footing and read the final paragraph without stopping. He looked up. "Good," Abigail said. "I made mistakes in the middle part," he said. "You did," she said. "And you corrected them and kept going. That's the thing." He considered this. "Is that true for most things, not just reading?" She looked at him. 17 years old, earnest and unguarded in the way of people who have not yet learned to be defensive. "Yes," she said. "That's true for most things." She wrote back to Charlotte that night. Not the letter she might have written 6 months ago. Not cold, not procedural, not the careful management of a wound. Something different. Something that had taken her all these months of distance and work and morning air to arrive at. She did not tell her sister everything was all right. It wasn't yet. She did not tell her she was forgiven. She wasn't sure. Forgiveness was the right frame for it. Wasn't sure she had arrived at a place where the word meant what Charlotte needed it to mean. But she wrote the truth. "I am well. I am better than well in most respects, which surprised me. I think I needed to leave Boston to understand who I was when I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me. I can't give you what you're asking for, Charlotte. Not entirely. Not yet. But I don't want you to suffer in silence either. That much is true. So write to me if you need to. Tell me what is actually happening, and I will try to tell you the same." She sealed it before she could reconsider. She sent it the next morning. And then she went back to the East Field, because Thomas had said the yield count needed doing before the end of the week, and there was no point standing still when there was work ahead of her. She had learned that much at least. The work helped. The work had always helped. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, the work was entirely hers. The yield count took 3 days. Abigail worked it herself alongside Thomas, moving through the rows with a tally board, and the particular focused quiet of someone who has learned that numbers don't lie, and that the truth, even when it's inconvenient, is always preferable to a comfortable fiction. The final count came in 11% above Thomas's spring projection. When she wrote the figure in the ledger that evening, she sat and looked at it for a moment before closing the book. She had done that. She and Thomas and Will and Eli and Samuel on land she had not known existed 8 months ago, in a state she had never visited, in a life she had not planned. She closed the ledger. She allowed herself exactly 1 minute of quiet satisfaction. Then she made a list of what needed doing in September. This was who she was now. She had stopped being surprised by it. Benjamin came by on the first Friday of September with a question about the County Road Commissioner's upcoming assessment, which would affect the eastern drive of her property. It was a legitimate question that required a 20-minute conversation and resulted in her needing to file a response by the end of the month. He had brought the relevant notice with him folded in his coat pocket, and he handed it to her with the directness that she had come to recognize as simply the way he moved through the world. No ceremony, no performance, just the thing itself. They stood on the porch and talked through the assessment. He knew the commissioner personally had filed similar responses twice before and walked her through the language she would need to use without making her feel that she was being managed. "You can reference your March survey in the response," he said. "The new stakes we set in June will support your claim on the eastern boundary." "I'll write it this weekend," she said. "Thank you for bringing it." He nodded. He was about to turn for the steps, and then he stopped. "There's a gathering at the Bryce farm next Saturday," he said. "Martha's husband used to host it every autumn before he passed. She's taken it up again this year. Most of the county families will be there." Abigail looked at him. "Martha didn't mention it to me," she said. "She likely assumed you'd be too busy," he said. "Or too new to want the company." A pause. "Are you too new? Too busy?" she considered. "No," she said. "I don't think I am." He nodded once. "Then I'll tell her to expect you." And he went down the steps, mounted his horse, and rode down the drive without looking back. She stood on the porch and watched him go, and she was doing the thing she had told herself she wasn't going to do anymore, which was read meaning into the spaces between what a man said and what he didn't say. She stopped herself. She went inside and started drafting her response to the County Road Commissioner. Martha, when she came by 2 days later, did not look particularly surprised to hear that Abigail was planning to attend the gathering. She looked, in fact, like someone trying not to look unsurprised, which was a different thing entirely. "Benjamin told you, I take it," Martha said. "He did," Abigail said. "Should he not have?" Martha turned a page in the account ledger without answering that. "There'll be about 40 people. The Mercer family, the Holloways, Judge Pratt, and his wife, a few families from north of the ridge. It's informal, a meal, some music, conversation." "I haven't been to a social gathering in nearly a year," Abigail said. "I know," Martha said. "I don't particularly miss them," Abigail said. "I know that too," Martha said. She looked up. "But you live in this county now. These are your neighbors, and it does you no good to be a mystery." Abigail thought of Boston. Of the whispers, of the carefully managed glances, of the exhausting performance of being fine in a room full of people who had decided what her situation meant before she'd had a chance to decide herself. "I'm not particularly interested in explaining myself to anyone," she said. "Then don't," Martha said simply. "Go eat well, be polite, and come home. That's all it needs to be." The gathering at the Bryce farm was, as Martha had promised, informal, which in Charlottesville, Abigail discovered, meant something somewhat different from informal in Boston. In Boston, informal still involved a certain performance, a careful calibration of ease that was itself a kind of effort. Here, informal seemed to mean people who were genuinely glad to see each other, who talked across each other without apology, who brought food they had made themselves and set it out without arrangement. She arrived with Martha and was introduced to more people in the first 20 minutes than she had met in 3 months. Judge Pratt, a broad-faced man with white eyebrows, who shook her hand with both of his and said he'd heard good things about the Eastfield yield. A woman named Catherine Holloway, who ran her family's property 3 miles west, and who looked at Abigail with the frank assessing gaze of someone deciding whether a person is worth her time, and then apparently decided yes, because she said, "Come find me after supper. I want to ask you about your account system. Martha says it's something to see." Abigail felt for the first time in longer than she could name something close to belonging. Then she looked across the yard and saw Nathaniel Carter. The world did not stop. She had half expected it to had expected the particular cinematic quality of certain moments, the way grief could make a crowd go silent even when nothing had changed. But the gathering continued around her, the voices and the laughter and the clinking of cups, and she stood very still for a moment in the middle of all of it and simply understood what she was seeing. Nathaniel Carter was in Charlottesville. Howe was standing near the far edge of the gathering with a man she didn't recognize, engaged in what appeared to be a business conversation. He had not seen her. She had 4 seconds before he would. She used them to breathe. Then she turned to Catherine Holloway, who was still beside her, and said, "Tell me about your east field. Is the drainage problem common here, or is it a question of soil composition?" Catherine blinked, then caught up. "Mostly drainage," she said. "You want to build up the south edge if were Abigail." She turned. Nathaniel had crossed the yard toward her with a speed that suggested he had in fact seen her before she'd seen him and had been building up to this. He looked uncertain, more uncertain than she had seen him in November in Northampton, which meant that something had changed in the months between. "Nathaniel," she said. "I didn't know you were in Virginia," he said. "I live here now," she said. "My grandfather's property." He looked genuinely startled. "Robert Hale's farm." "Yes." A pause. Catherine Holloway had not moved. She was standing at Abigail's shoulder with the particular stillness of a woman who has assessed a situation and decided her presence is not unwelcome. "This is Catherine Holloway," Abigail said. "My neighbor." "Catherine, this is Nathaniel Carter, from Boston." The two exchanged the briefest of nods. "What brings you to Charlottesville?" Abigail asked. Her voice was steady. She was almost proud of it. "Business," he said. "There's a land acquisition it's complicated." He looked at her with an expression she could not quite categorize. Not quite guilt. Not quite relief. Something in between, something unsettled. "Can we speak privately?" "I'm at a gathering, Nathaniel," she said. "This isn't the time." "I know, but—" He lowered his voice. "It's important. There's something you need to know. About what actually happened." She looked at him. Catherine Holloway shifted almost imperceptibly at her shoulder. "I know what happened," Abigail said. "You know what I let you believe happened," he said. And something in the way he said it, quiet, direct, with none of his usual ease, made her stop. She looked at him for a long moment. "Tomorrow," she said. "Come to the Hale property, at 10 o'clock. He nodded. He looked like a man who had been holding something for a long time and had just been given permission maybe to set it down. He walked back the way he'd come. Catherine turned to her. "Old friend," she said with a delicacy that was itself a kind of kindness. "Old history," Abigail said. "The worst kind," Catherine said, and handed her a cup. "Drink that. You look like you need it." Benjamin found her 20 minutes later. She was standing near the edge of the gathering with her cup not quite inside the crowd and not quite outside it, and he came to stand beside her with the unhurried quality of a man who is not performing anything. "You met the Holloways," he said. "Catherine is formidable," she said. "She is," he agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "I saw Carter," he said. "He's connected to the Mercer acquisition. There's a land deal that involves several properties in the north of the county." Abigail looked at him. "The Mercer acquisition. A group of Boston investors," he said. He had turned to face her now, and his voice had gone careful in a way she hadn't heard before. "There are 4 of them. They've been buying up land through intermediaries, identifying properties that have unclear titles or recent ownership changes. They make offers below value and then flip the land within 18 months. She felt something cold move through her. "How long has this been happening?" she said. "The first purchase was 18 months ago," he said. "I've been tracking it because 2 of the properties border mine. I hired an attorney in Richmond to look at the deeds." A pause. "One of the 4 investors is Nathaniel Carter." The gathering moved on around them. Someone laughed at something across the yard. The music that had started up earlier was a slow, easy fiddle tune that she would remember for a long time afterward. "He came to Virginia for my land," she said. "I can't tell you that with certainty," Benjamin said. "But the Hale property has been on their list. I saw it in the correspondence my attorney obtained." She set her cup down on the fence post beside her. "He asked to speak with me," she said. "Tonight. He said there's something I need to know. About what actually happened." "I know," Benjamin said. "I heard." She looked at him. "You were nearby." "I was nearby," he said. He didn't apologize for it. "Abigail, whatever he tells you tomorrow, be careful what you sign. Be careful what you agree to. Don't let him—" He stopped. "I'm sorry. That's not my place." "No," she said. "Say it." He looked at her directly. "Don't let him use the history between you to get what he wants. That's all." A long pause. "I'm not 23 anymore," she said quietly. "No," he said. "You're not." They stood together in the evening air for another minute, not talking, and it was the most honest silence she had stood in for a very long time. Nathaniel arrived at 10 o'clock exactly the next morning. She received him in the front room, seated with the door to the hall open, and Martha in the kitchen within reasonable earshot. She was not naive about the geometry of this situation. He sat across from her. He held his hat in both hands. He looked in the clear morning light like a man who had not slept well. Good, she thought. Then she set the thought aside. "Say what you came to say," she said. He looked at the hat in his hands. Then he looked at her. "Your grandfather didn't leave you that land by accident," he said. She waited. "Robert Hale reached out to your father years ago," he said. "You knew that much. What you didn't know, what I didn't know until 6 months ago, is that he also reached out to me." Abigail went very still. "To you," she said. "To my father originally. My father died before anything came of it. But I found the correspondence last winter going through the estate papers." He exhaled. "Robert Hale wrote to my father asking him to look into the property's situation. He knew the farm was going to be complicated to pass on. He had creditors, some of whom had been claiming against the estate. He was looking for someone to help manage the transfer so it didn't get tied up in legal disputes. And your father was going to do this," she said. "My father agreed to it. The arrangement was, it was going to be structured as a partnership between the Hale property and a Boston investor group. Your grandfather would sign over management rights during his lifetime, and the property would pass cleanly at his death." Nathaniel stopped. "The investor group was the one I joined 6 months after your grandfather died." The room was very quiet. "You knew," she said. "When you came to Virginia, you knew whose land this was." "Yes," he said. "And the petition you were planning to make to me, to speak privately." She felt something cold and clarifying move through her. Not rage, not grief, but the particular feeling of a picture snapping into focus. "What were you going to ask me to sign, Nathaniel?" He flinched. Barely. But she caught it. "A management agreement," he said. "I told myself it was fair, that you didn't know how to run a property of this size, that it would protect you." "That you would be protecting me," she said flatly. "I know how that sounds." "Do you?" Her voice was still level. She was proud of that. "You left me for my sister. You moved to Virginia to acquire my land. And you were going to present yourself as my protector. I told you, when I knew it was your property, when I found out you were here, I couldn't do it." He looked at her. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. I came to warn you, Abigail. The others in the group don't know I'm here. They're going to approach you through an attorney. His name is Harmon. He'll present the agreement as routine estate management. He'll tell you it's in your interest." She stood up. She walked to the window and stood there with her back to him for a moment. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because she needed 10 seconds to arrange the order of her thoughts. Then she turned around. "Why?" she said. "Why are you warning me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I owe you a debt I can't repay any other way," he said. "And because—" He stopped, started again. "Charlotte told me in her letter to you that you were the only honest person in her life. I've been thinking about that for 2 months." He looked at the floor. She was right, and I was the opposite of that. Abigail looked at him. She did not feel sorry for him. She did not feel angry exactly. What she felt was something more like the clean, final sensation of a door she had been half expecting to open for 3 years, swinging open at last, and showing her nothing she hadn't already suspected. Just the truth, sitting there waiting to be looked at. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "What is the attorney's name again?" "Harmon," he said. "David Harmon. He'll come with a Richmond address, but the group is all Boston." "I'll need it in writing," she said. "What you've just told me." He looked up. "You want me to write a statement," he said. "Yes," she said. "Voluntarily, and without my asking twice, please." A pause, then slowly. "All right. I'll have Martha bring paper," she said, and turned toward the hall to do exactly that. She sent a rider to Benjamin's property that afternoon with a brief note. "You were right." He confirmed it. "There is an attorney named David Harmon, Richmond address. I have a written statement. I need to know who the best legal counsel in this county is. Please advise when you're able. A.W." His reply came back within the hour. "Judge Pratt's son-in-law. Name is Robert Calloway. He's in Richmond but comes to county twice a month. He owes me a favor. I'll send word today. B.A." She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her writing case alongside Nathaniel's written statement and went to find Thomas because the tobacco crop still needed finishing and the world, whatever else it was doing, was not going to wait. Robert Calloway came to the property the following Thursday. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 32, with quick, sharp eyes and the manner of a man who is always thinking 3 steps ahead, but has the courtesy to wait until he's heard you out before he says so. He read Nathaniel's statement. He read the property deed. He asked 8 questions in rapid succession and then sat back and said, "This is a clean case. Attempted fraudulent acquisition of an estate in probate. The group overreached, they moved before the title was properly cleared, and your grandfather's creditor claims were settled. There are 2 of those claims still pending, and they've been using that as leverage to argue the estate isn't fully yours yet." "Is it?" Abigail said. "Yes," he said. "Completely. The creditor claims are small and easily settled. I can file to clear them within the month. After that, no one has a legitimate angle on this property. And the investor group. They lose their angle the moment the claims are settled," he said. "They know that, which is why they were moving fast." He looked at Nathaniel's statement again. "This helps considerably. If they push, this is evidence of predatory intent." "Will they push?" she said. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Some investor groups fold when they see the legal path close. Others dig in." He looked at her. "Are you prepared for it to go the hard way, if it has to?" She thought of Eleanor, of Thomas's face when she told him the east field was being rotated, of Samuel reading his passage without stopping. "Yes," she said, "but I'd prefer to settle it cleanly." "Then let me start Monday," he said, and they shook hands. The hard way was not required. Calloway filed to clear the creditor claims on Monday. By Wednesday, he had received word from a Richmond attorney, not Harmon, a different man. Senior, and with more concern for his reputation, that the investor group was withdrawing their interest in the Hale property. He rode out to tell her himself. "That fast," she said. "They didn't have much choice once the title was moving to clear," he said. "Without the creditor angle, they had no legitimate reason to approach you. Harmon apparently advised retreat." "And Nathaniel Carter's involvement," she said. Calloway looked at her carefully. "His name was in the group's filings. That's a matter of record. Whether anything comes of it legally depends on whether you want to pursue it." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "He came to me voluntarily. He gave me the statement without being compelled. Whatever he was before that counts for something." Calloway nodded without comment. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," she said. "Please send me your account and I'll settle it by the end of the week." He tipped his hat and left. She sat at the table for a long moment after he had gone. The account ledger was open in front of her. The creditor claims had been small, $112 total, easily covered from the summer yield. The legal fees would be manageable. The property was hers, completely, without contest. She had walked into this situation with a 2.5-page list of questions and no knowledge of Virginia soil. And she had come through it with the land intact and her own name on the deed in clear, undisputed ink. She permitted herself a longer moment of satisfaction than usual. Then she wrote to Eleanor. The letter she wrote was not about the legal matter, or not primarily. She wrote about the morning light on the east field, which was different in September than it had been in June. Cooler, more angled golden, in a way that made everything look slightly deliberate, as though someone had decided exactly where to put it. She wrote about Samuel, who had finished his first full book, and had come to her the previous evening, with it held out in both hands like an offering. She wrote about Catherine Holloway, who had come to look at the account system and stayed for 3 hours and left with a sheaf of notes and the promise of a return visit. She wrote about the particular satisfaction of work that was hers fully and without qualification, and at the end she wrote, "I think I understand now what you meant that evening on the porch about worth being something you carry rather than something you're given. I think I understood it with my head then. I understand it in my body now. There's a difference. I'm not sure I can explain it better than that, but I think you'll know what I mean." She sealed it. She would mail it in the morning. She sat with the quiet of the house around her for a few minutes, not thinking of anything in particular. Not of Nathaniel, not of Boston, not of Charlotte's letter, not of the legal matter, now resolved. Just sitting in the ordinary evening quiet of her own house on her own land at 27 years old, being exactly who she was. Then she heard footsteps on the porch. A knock. She opened the door. Benjamin Ashford stood there with his hat in his hand and the last of the September light behind him, and he said, "Calloway sent me word. I wanted to make sure it was settled to your satisfaction." "It is," she said, "entirely." He nodded. He looked at her with the straightforward attention that she had stopped trying to interpret and had simply started accepting as the particular way he saw things. "Good," he said. A pause. The evening was cooling fast, the way Virginia evenings did in September, a sudden drop that caught you off guard every time. "Would you like to come in?" she said. "I have coffee on." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I would." She stepped back from the door. He came in. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee and talked for 2 hours. Not about the legal matter, which had already resolved itself and required no further discussion. They talked about the East Field rotation. He had done the same thing to his North Field 2 years ago and had specific practical knowledge about the transition. They talked about Samuel, whose progress Abigail described with an enthusiasm she hadn't fully realized she felt until she heard herself speaking about it. They talked about Catherine Holloway, whom he had known for years, and whose assessment of Abigail, he said this without embellishment, was the highest he had heard her give a newcomer in all the time he'd known her. "What did she say?" Abigail asked. He turned his cup once. "She said you didn't pretend to know things you didn't know, that you asked better questions than most people who'd been here for years." A pause. "She said she thought you were going to be someone in this county." Abigail looked at the table. Something moved through her that was complicated and warm and not entirely comfortable. "I'm not trying to be someone," she said. "I know," he said. That's probably why she said it. She looked up at him. He was watching her with that direct, undemanding attention, and she was tired. She was genuinely tired of pretending that she didn't feel the weight of it. That she didn't feel the particular quality of being seen by this man as different from being seen by other people. It was different. She didn't know what to do with the difference yet, but she was done pretending it wasn't there. "Benjamin," she said. He waited. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to answer me honestly, the way you seem to answer everything." "All right," he said. "Why do you come here?" she said. "Not the reasons you bring with you. The mill wheel recommendation, the county, notice the boundary survey. I mean, why do you actually come?" The kitchen was very quiet. He set his cup down. "Because," he said slowly, "I spent a great many years thinking that what I wanted didn't matter much provided the work was getting done. And then I met a woman on a westbound stage who looked like she'd just made the hardest decision of her life and was making peace with it. And I thought—" He stopped, looked at her. "I thought that was a person I would like to know." She sat very still. "That's a long time to keep coming by with mill-wheel recommendations," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but close. "I didn't want to assume," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had walked the fence line with her and brought her a name on a folded paper and warned her without being asked and sat beside her at a gathering while the world went sideways and had never not once made her feel that her not knowing something was a deficiency or her knowing something was a threat. "Don't stop coming by," she said, quietly, clearly. He looked at her. "No," he said. "I won't." Outside, the September night had settled in full. The insects were very loud. Somewhere across the field, something moved in the dry grass and was still. Inside, two people sat at a kitchen table in the quiet, and for once, for the first time in longer than she could account for, Abigail Whitmore was not waiting for anything at all. October came in like a quiet promise kept. The creditor claims were cleared by the 5th of the month. Calloway sent word with a brief professional note and a final accounting that she settled within the week. The property deed, now completely uncontested, sat in her writing case alongside Eleanor's letters and the 2.5 pages of questions she had brought from Massachusetts, questions she had mostly answered by now through trial and error, and the particular education of simply doing the work until she understood it. She kept the question list anyway. It reminded her of who she had been when she arrived, and she had decided that woman deserved to be remembered rather than quietly set aside. Benjamin came by on a Tuesday, then again on Friday. They had not spoken of what had passed between them in the kitchen. Not directly. Not with the kind of explicit language that would have required one of them to be brave in a way that might also be foolish. But something had shifted, and they both knew it, and they moved around the knowledge of it with the careful attention of two people who have learned separately, and the hard way, not to rush the things that matter. He helped her think through the winter planning for the South Field. She asked his opinion on a proposed arrangement with a mill 3 miles east, and he gave it plainly and without inflating his own importance to the decision. He stayed 2 hours. When he left, he turned at the end of the drive and looked back once briefly, and she was standing on the porch, and she did not pretend she hadn't seen it. Martha, reviewing the accounts. The following morning said nothing, but she was smiling at the ledger in a way that had nothing to do with the ledger. "Don't," Abigail said. "I didn't say a word," Martha said. Charlotte's next letter arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after Abigail had written back to her. It was shorter than the last one, 2 pages, not 4. The loops were tighter. The words were more careful, as though Charlotte had revised it more than the previous letter, as though she understood better now what she was actually asking for and was trying not to ask for too much. She wrote about the child, a girl born in October, named Eleanor after Abigail's aunt, a detail that landed in Abigail's chest with a precision she hadn't expected. She wrote that Nathaniel had returned from Virginia and had not told her why, only that the business matter had not gone as expected. She wrote in the 3rd paragraph the thing that was clearly the reason she had written at all. "I don't know what he went to Virginia to do. I think I don't want to know, and I also think that not wanting to know is exactly the kind of thing I've been doing too long. He came home different, quieter. I asked him what happened, and he said he'd made a mistake, and I asked what kind, and he said the kind you can't fix, only live with. I thought he meant about you. I asked him. He said yes." Abigail set the letter down. She sat with it for a long time. Nathaniel had gone home and told Charlotte that much. Not everything probably she doubted he would have told her about the investor group, about Harmon, about the written statement. But enough. Enough that Charlotte knew there had been something to tell. She picked the letter up and read the last paragraph. "I named her Eleanor because I wanted her to have a name that means something good. I thought about naming her Abigail, but I didn't think I had the right. If you ever want to meet her, I would like that very much. If you don't, I understand that too. But I wanted you to know she exists. And I wanted you to know that she is so far exactly the kind of person who looks at the world like it's full of things worth seeing. I don't know where she gets it. Maybe from the Whitmore side. Abigail looked at that last line for a long time. Then she got up, put on her coat, and went out to the east field, because Thomas had said the post-harvest assessment needed doing, and she had been putting it off for 3 days, and standing still had never yet helped her think more clearly than moving did. She told Benjamin about the letter that Friday without planning to. They were walking the north fence line, a practical reason, a genuine one. There was a section that needed new stakes before the ground froze, and she was talking about the field assessment, and then she said without transition, Charlotte named her daughter Eleanor. Benjamin was quiet for a moment. Then, after your aunt? Yes. He set a stake in the ground and tested it. How do you feel about that? She considered. I don't know yet, she said. There are about 4 different things I feel about it, and they don't agree with each other. That sounds about right, he said. She said. Abigail paused. She said she thought about naming the girl Abigail, but didn't think she had the right. Benjamin looked up at her. That took something, he said. Yes, she said. It did. They moved to the next section of fence. The morning was cold and clear, and the ground was just beginning to firm underfoot, the first intimation of what November would bring. Are you going to write back? He asked. Yes, she said, without hesitation, which surprised her slightly. Not because everything is resolved. It isn't. But because Charlotte is trying to be honest, and I think the least I can do is try to receive that honestly. He nodded. He did not tell her it was the right decision, or the generous one, or the thing a good woman would do. He just accepted it as hers, which was what she had needed him to do, though she hadn't known it until he did it. Benjamin, she said. He stopped, looked at her. Did you have family before you came back to Virginia? She paused. I realize I've told you a considerable amount about my history, and I know very little about yours. I was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone deciding what to hide, but the silence of someone choosing how to begin. I was engaged, he said, a long time ago, before the military. She was a good woman. She married someone else while I was in the South. I don't say that with bitterness, he added. It was the right thing for her. I was gone a long time and I didn't write often enough, and I think I had convinced myself that the work was more important than the people I'd left behind. He looked at the fence post in his hands. I was wrong about that. By the time I understood it, it was too late to do anything with the understanding except carry it. Abigail looked at him. How long have you been carrying it? She said. Long enough, he said, to know what I'd do differently. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the fence line. Tell me about the south section, she said. Is the soil the same as the north, or does it drain differently? He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Differently, he said. The south has a clay layer about 18 inches down that, and they walked on and talked about the land, and the air between them was warmer than the October morning warranted. The invitation arrived on the 22nd of October. It came from Judge Pratt's wife, a thick cream envelope addressed in a formal hand, bearing an invitation to a harvest dinner at the Pratt house on the first Saturday of November. 40 guests, it said. A celebration of the county's autumn yield. Black dress expected for the ladies, formal coat for the gentlemen. Martha handed it to her without comment. Abigail read it. Did you get one? She asked. I did, Martha said. It's the first time the Pratts have invited anyone new in 3 years. They're particular about their list. Abigail set the invitation on the table. Catherine Holloway will be there. Catherine Holloway is always there, Martha said. She's Judge Pratt's wife's favorite person in the county. Benjamin. Almost certainly. Abigail picked up the invitation again. 40 people. A formal dinner. The kind of gathering she had once navigated in Boston with careful precision, the kind she had been relieved to leave behind. But this was different. This county, these people, they had seen her work. They had seen the Eastfield yield. They had heard through whatever invisible current carried such things in a small county that she had faced down an investor group and come out with her title clean. She was not being invited as Nathaniel Carter's discarded intended. She was being invited as Abigail Whitmore of the Hale property. I'll go, she said. She almost didn't. Not because of nerves, she had moved past the specific kind of nerves that come from caring too much what a room thinks of you. But 3 days before the dinner, a letter arrived from Gerald Whitmore in Philadelphia, and its contents required her full attention. The letter was not about the property. It was about her father. George Whitmore had suffered a collapse, not fatal. Gerald was careful to say, not fatal, but serious. Serious, his heart giving out one afternoon in the front parlor, and he had been abed for a week with the doctor coming every other day. He was recovering. He was expected to recover. But he was not well. Abigail read the letter twice quickly. Then she sat down and made herself think. She could go to Boston. She could be there in 4 days if she left immediately. The property could manage without her for 2 weeks. Thomas was capable. The season was winding down. There were no urgent decisions pending. She wrote to Thomas. She wrote to Calloway. She wrote to Martha with a list of things that needed attention in her absence. Then she wrote to Benjamin. My father is unwell. I need to go to Boston for a time. I'm not sure how long, 2 weeks, perhaps 3. The property is in Thomas's hands. Martha will manage the accounts. I wanted to tell you myself, rather than have you come by and find the house quiet. A.W. His reply came the same evening within hours of her sending the message. Go. Take what time you need. The fence line will wait, and so will everything else. I hope your father recovers quickly. Travel safe. B.A. She folded the note. She put it in her coat pocket, not her writing case. She wasn't entirely sure why. She left for Boston the next morning. Her father was smaller than she remembered. This was the first thing she noticed. Not that he was old. She had always known he was old, but that he had compressed somehow in the months she'd been away, as though some essential structural element had been quietly removed. He was sitting up in bed when she arrived, which the doctor had said was a good sign, and he looked at her when she came through the bedroom door with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It took her a moment to identify it. Relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. As though he had not been sure until this moment that she was real. Abigail, he said. I'm here, Father, she said. She sat in the chair beside the bed and took his hand. It was thinner than she remembered, the knuckles more pronounced. I came as soon as Gerald wrote. You didn't have to come, he said. I know, she said. He looked at their joined hands. How is the property? It's good, she said. The east field came in 11% above projection. I have 4 reliable men and a neighbor who knows the county. A neighbor, he said. Something in his tone. She ignored it. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Charlotte came last week. Abigail looked at him. She brought the baby, he said. Her name is Eleanor. I know, Abigail said. She wrote to me. He nodded slowly. She sat in that chair for an hour. Didn't say much. Just sat there. He paused. She looks like your mother, Abigail. I don't know what to do with that. Abigail thought of the letter. I don't know where she gets it. Maybe from the Whitmore side. Did Charlotte ask about me? She said. She asked if I'd heard from you, he said. I told her you were managing the property and that you seemed well, more than well. He looked at her. You do. You look different. Different how? He thought about it. Like you fit, he said finally. Like you're the right size for the life you're in. She sat with that for a moment. I think I might be, she said. She stayed 11 days. She did not see Charlotte, which was a decision she made on the 3rd day and held to without guilt. Not because she was unwilling. She had written back, she had opened the door, but because she knew herself well enough to know that a face-to-face meeting with her sister in Boston, in the house where she had grown up while her father was still recovering, was more than she could manage cleanly. She would do it, but not like this. Not under these conditions. She would do it on ground that was hers. She managed her father's household for 11 days, cooked with the kitchen girl, settled 2 outstanding bills, and sat with him every evening, while he told her things he had never told her before. Stories about her mother, about the early years of their marriage, about the particular woman her mother had been before grief and illness had narrowed her world. Abigail listened to all of it. She had not known her mother the way her father was describing her. She was glad even now to be learning. On the 9th day, her father said, "Tell me about this neighbor." She looked up from the mending she'd taken up out of pure habit. "He's a landowner," she said. "Former military. His family's been in the county for 2 generations. He helped me when the legal matter came up with the property." "Legal matter," her father said sharply. "It's resolved," she said. "Completely. He helped me find the right attorney." Her father was quiet. Then, "Is he a good man?" She set down the mending. "Yes," she said. "I believe he is." Her father nodded. He looked at the window for a moment, then back at her. "Your mother used to say," he said slowly, "that you could tell everything about a person by how they behaved when they had nothing to gain." He paused. Did this man have anything to gain? Abigail thought of Benjamin at the gathering warning her about Harmon. Benjamin at the fence line, answering her questions, without making her feel she should already know the answers. Benjamin's note in her coat pocket. "The fence line will wait, and so will everything else." "No," she said. "He had nothing to gain." Her father nodded again, the small tired nod of a man who has received a sufficient answer. "Good," he said, and closed his eyes. She arrived back at the Hale property on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-November. Thomas came out of the barn when he heard the coach. Samuel appeared from somewhere around the back of the house. Martha was on the porch before the coach had fully stopped, and she handed Abigail a stack of correspondence and a cup of coffee in almost the same motion, and said, "The Southfield drainage held up fine. Eli found a problem with the east barn roof that needs attention before the first freeze, and Mr. Ashford came by twice." Abigail took the correspondence and the coffee. "How was he?" she said. "Same as always," Martha said. "Useful and not very talkative." She set the correspondence on the kitchen table and drank the coffee standing up. Looking at her house, feeling the particular weight of it, settled back around her. The familiar sounds and smells and the quality of the light through the kitchen windows, which she had not known she had memorized until she saw it again and felt something release in her chest. She was home. She had not let herself think that word in Boston. It would have been too large, too new, too much to test. But here, standing in her own kitchen with coffee and a stack of letters, and Thomas's voice from the yard telling Samuel to watch the left side of that plank, she thought it plainly and without qualification. Home. Benjamin came the next morning. He knocked at 8 o'clock, which was early, and when she opened the door, he was standing there with his hat in his hand, and the particular look of a man who had been trying to decide something and had finally decided. "Come in," she said. "I won't stay long," he said. He came in. He remained standing. "How is your father?" "Recovering," she said, slowly but genuinely. "Good." He turned his hat once. "I want to ask you something." She waited. "The harvest dinner at the Pratts'," he said. "It was while you were gone. I didn't go." She looked at him. "Why not?" "Because I'd been planning to ask you to attend with me," he said. "And then you left, and it didn't seem worth going without asking you, so I stayed home." A pause. "You declined Judge Pratt's invitation," she said, "because I was in Boston." "Yes," he said. He said it with perfect composure, as though this were a completely ordinary statement rather than the most direct thing he had said to her in 4 months of careful, unhurried conversation. She looked at him. She thought of the note in her coat pocket. "The fence line will wait, and so will everything else." "Benjamin," she said. "I know it's too soon," he said. "I'm not asking for anything immediate. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I want you to know. I want to stop being careful in a way that leaves you uncertain, because you deserve certainty. You've earned it." She was very still. "What are you asking?" she said, quietly, clearly. He looked at her with the direct, undemanding attention that had been the first thing she had noticed about him on a westbound stage on a hot July morning that felt like another lifetime. "To court you," he said. "Properly, openly, if you'll permit it." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Thomas was talking to Samuel about the barn roof. The morning light was coming through the window at the angle she had missed for 11 days. She could feel the weight of everything that had brought her here, the 3 years of waiting, the wedding bells ringing for someone else. The stage to Massachusetts Eleanor's porch, the 2.5 pages of questions, the East Field, the legal matter. Her father's face when she walked through the door, Charlotte's letter about a daughter named Eleanor. All of it had been in some way she couldn't have planned and wouldn't have chosen, leading her to stand in this kitchen on this land, with this man standing in front of her asking her plainly for what he wanted, and waiting without pressure, without assumption for her answer. She had once confused patience with hope, and paid for it. This was different. This man had never asked her to wait. He had simply waited himself. "Yes," she said. "I'll permit it." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatic, not florid, not the performed relief of a man who has gotten what he came for. Just something quiet and genuine, like a tension he had not known he was carrying finally releasing. "Thank you," he said, plainly. "Don't thank me," she said, and almost smiled. "Earn it." He looked at her. And this time, he did smile fully without restraint, and it rearranged his face entirely, turned it into the face of a man who is in this particular moment very simply glad. "Yes, ma'am," he said. November moved forward, and Charlottesville knew within a week. She had not announced it. She had not done anything differently exactly. Benjamin came by the property with the same frequency as before, stayed the same amount of time, talked about the same practical subjects. But there was something different in the way he stood on her porch, in the small adjustments of manner that a man makes when he has been given permission to stop pretending he doesn't care about something. Catherine Holloway came by on a Thursday, with the thin pretense of returning a borrowed account book, and within 5 minutes of sitting down in the kitchen said flatly, "So it's Ashford then?" Abigail poured coffee. "I don't know what you mean." "You know precisely what I mean," Catherine said. "The whole county is talking about it, which is good, because the whole county was previously talking about the Boston investors who tried to take your land, and this is considerably more pleasant." Abigail set the coffee down. "We are beginning to know each other," she said carefully. "You've known each other for 4 months," Catherine said. "He didn't go to the Pratt dinner." "I'm aware. He sits with you at the Bryce gathering, and then walks the fence line with you every other week, and brings you county notices, and recommends mill workers." Catherine held up a hand. "I'm not criticizing. I'm saying good. He's a good man. One of the few in this county whose word I'd take without a written guarantee." Abigail looked at her. "Did you come here to tell me that?" she said. "I came here to return the account book," Catherine said with perfect composure. "The rest is simply conversation." The letter she had been half expecting came in the 3rd week of November. It was from Charlotte. Short. 3 paragraphs. The first said she had heard from their father that Abigail had come to Boston and left without calling. She understood. She was not asking for an explanation. The second said that Nathaniel had told her finally about Virginia. Not everything Charlotte wrote, but enough. Enough for her to understand what he had gone there to do, and what he had done instead. She had not known what to say to him when he told her. She still didn't. The 3rd paragraph said, "I am not writing to ask you to forgive him. Or me. I am writing because Eleanor the baby looked at me this morning in a way that no one has ever looked at me before, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered, and I thought I want to deserve that. I don't know yet how to become a person who deserves that. But I thought you should know I'm trying." Abigail read it once. Then she sat down and wrote back immediately, while the feeling was clear, and before she could second-guess it, Charlotte. "Come to Virginia in the spring. Bring Eleanor. We will not solve everything in one visit, and I am not asking you to try. But come. The East Field will be planted by April, and there will be room for you both, and I find that I would like to meet my niece. Abigail." She sealed it and sent it with the morning rider. Then she sat at the table and felt the shape of the decision settle into her. Not comfortable, exactly, not easy, but solid. True. The kind of thing that might cause her pain later, but that she would not regret. She was choosing again, deliberately, on her own terms. She had gotten good at that. Benjamin came by that afternoon with a question about the spring planting schedule, a genuine one, which she answered from the ledger, and they talked for an hour about soil preparation and seed supply and the county market schedule for the following year. When they were done, he did not immediately stand to leave the way he usually did. He said, "There's something I want to show you, on the Ashford property, if you have time Saturday morning." She looked at him. "What is it?" she said. "Something I think you should see," he said, "before I ask you something else." She studied him for a moment. He was doing the thing she had noticed occasionally, where his face was very still and very deliberate, as though he were keeping something carefully in place. "All right," she said. "Saturday morning." He nodded. He stood. He picked up his hat from the table. "Abigail," he said. He stopped at the kitchen doorway. "What you did facing Carter working with Calloway managing this property from nothing. I want you to know, I haven't said enough about how I see that." She waited. "I've seen men with 20 years of experience and twice the resources manage worse," he said. "I want you to know I see it. And I want you to know I'm not coming here because I think you need someone. You've made it very clear you don't." "Then why?" she said, softly, already knowing but wanting to hear it. "Because I want to," he said. "That's all. Simply because I want to." She held his gaze. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday," he said. And he went, and she stood in her kitchen in the November afternoon and felt moving through her chest like the first warm day after a long winter. Something she recognized, even though she had not felt it quite like this before. Not the anxious contingent feeling of someone waiting to be chosen. Something steadier than that. Something that was entirely unconditionally hers. Saturday came in cold and bright, the kind of November morning that had no patience for hesitation. Abigail dressed practically heavy wool, good boots, her warmest gloves, because Benjamin had said he wanted to show her something on the property, and she had learned enough about Virginia land to know that showing someone something rarely happened indoors. She told Martha she would be at the Ashford property until mid-morning. Martha said nothing, but she handed Abigail an extra scarf with the expression of a woman who had already decided how this particular Saturday was going to end and was pleased about it. Benjamin was waiting at his gate when she arrived. He had 2 horses saddled. He helped her mount without making it a production, simply held the bridle steady and stepped back, and they rode out across the north field in the early light, without speaking the way people ride together, who have grown comfortable with each other's silence. They rode for perhaps 20 minutes before he pulled up. She pulled up beside him. She looked at what he was looking at. It was a piece of land, a flat, well-watered piece that ran along the shared creek between their properties, perhaps 30 acres sheltered on the north side by a tree line that broke the winter wind. It was good land. She could see that even now in November, when everything was pulled back into itself. "This is the parcel I've been thinking about," he said. "It's been fallow for 3 years. I wasn't sure what to do with it." She looked at it. "What are you thinking of doing with it now?" He turned in the saddle to face her. "I'm thinking of building a school on it." She looked at him. "A proper one," he said. "Not a room in someone's house. A building with enough space for 30 children, a library, a room for adult instruction in the evenings." He paused. "I've been in this county long enough to know that the families along the creek road don't have anything closer than 8 miles for their children's schooling. 8 miles is too far in winter." She was very quiet. "You've been planning this," she said. "For about 2 years," he said. "I had the land and the intention, but not the—" He stopped. "I didn't have anyone to build it with." She looked at the parcel. She thought of Samuel reading his first full book with his whole face. She thought of Isaac in Massachusetts going on to county school doing very well. She thought of the particular feeling of watching someone understand something for the first time, the way it moved through you, like something you couldn't name and didn't need to. "How many children?" she said. "As many as we can reach," he said. She looked at him. "We," she said. "If you're willing," he said. "Your property, my land. Your experience with the school in Massachusetts. My connections in the county." A pause. Together. The horses shifted under them. The creek moved somewhere below, unhurried. She made herself think clearly, because this mattered, and she was not going to answer it with anything less than her full attention. She thought about what it would require. The planning, the fundraising, the persuading of county families that education for their children was worth the disruption of their routines. She thought about what she had already done in a year that she had not known she could do. She thought about the look on Samuel's face when he finished a passage without stopping. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing." He exhaled. And for a moment she saw clearly how much this had mattered to him. Not the land, not the building, but the answer. Her answer specifically. "Good," he said, and turned his horse back toward the house. "Come inside. I have maps and measurements, and I want your opinion on the layout before I bring in an architect." She followed him, and she was smiling before she had decided to. They spent 3 hours at his kitchen table with maps and figures and a set of notes he had been keeping in a plain brown ledger that was, she noticed, organized in a way remarkably similar to her own account system. Clear categories, dated entries, a running total of projected costs in the right margin. She pointed this out. "Martha told me about your system," he said without looking up from the map. "Last spring." She looked at him. "Martha told you." "She mentioned it was something to see," he said. He did look up then. She was right. Abigail looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the map. "The entrance should face east," she said. "The morning light matters more than you'd think for children trying to read." He made a note. They worked well together. She had expected it abstractly, but the reality of it was something different, the specific ease of two people whose minds moved at compatible speeds, who could disagree about a detail, talk it through, and arrive at something neither had considered alone. She argued for a larger library room. He argued for a second teaching space that could serve adults in the evenings. They ended up with both fitted more cleverly than either of their original plans, because she had seen how to do it on the second page of his measurements. "You're good at this," he said. "Spatial problems," she said. "I've been managing a house since I was 11. You learn to see where things fit." He looked at her, that direct, unhurried attention. "You've been managing things since you were 11, he said. "Yes." "And no one thought to ask you," he said, "what you wanted to build." She was very still. "No," she said. "Not until now." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, his farmhand was crossing the yard. She could hear the footsteps, the creak of the barn door. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. "I'm asking now," he said. "Not just about the school. What do you want, Abigail? Abigail, not what you're willing to do. What do you want?" She looked at the map on the table between them. Then she looked at him. "This," she said. "Work that matters. Land that's mine. People around me who earn my trust and keep it." She paused. "And someone to build things with." He held her gaze. "That last one," he said carefully. "Yes," she said. "That one too." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Not dramatically, not as a performance. Just set his hand over hers and left it there. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a moment. Just sat. The map between them and the morning light and the plans for something that didn't exist yet, but would, because they were going to build it. She was halfway home when she heard the horse behind her. She turned. It was Benjamin riding fast, which he almost never did. He pulled up alongside her and said without preamble, "A rider just came from town. There's a man at the county courthouse, an attorney from Richmond. He's filed a challenge to your deed." She went cold. Calloway said, "It's not Harmon," he said. "It's a different name. A man called Prewitt. He's filed on behalf of a creditor claim that Calloway didn't know existed." She held her horse steady. Her mind was already moving. "A creditor that wasn't in the estate papers. That's what I'm told," he said. "The courthouse clerk sent word to Judge Pratt, who sent word to me because he knew I'd get to you faster." He looked at her steadily. "This may be a legitimate claim, or it may be the investor group trying a different angle. Either way, you need Calloway today. Can you send a rider to Richmond?" "Already done," he said, "before I came after you." She looked at him. He had heard the news sent for her attorney and come to find her himself, all before she had known there was anything to find out. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Let's find out what we're dealing with first." They rode to the courthouse together. Prewitt was a small man with a meticulous manner and a briefcase he handled with excessive care, and he met Abigail in the courthouse hallway with the expression of someone who has prepared a great deal for this meeting and is not accustomed to the opposing party arriving composed. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I represent the estate of a Mr. Aldous Crane of Philadelphia, who held a promissory note signed by your grandfather in 1809. The note has not been satisfied." "How much?" she said. He named a figure. It was not small, $460, but it was not impossible either. Not ruinous. She kept her face still. "I'll need to see the original note," she said. "And the chain of ownership if Mr. Crane is deceased." Prewitt blinked. He had not expected that. "Of course," he said. "I can produce today," she said. "Please." He looked at her for a moment. Then he opened his briefcase. Benjamin stood 2 steps behind her and said nothing. He was not there to speak. He was there because she had not asked him to leave, and he understood the difference. She examined the documents. She knew enough by now to know what she was looking at. Gerald Whitmore had spent 4 letters educating her on the basics of estate creditor law, which she had read and reread with the thoroughness she applied to everything that mattered. The note was real. The signature was her grandfather's. The chain of ownership was clean. She handed the documents back to Prewitt. "This is a legitimate claim," she said. "I will settle it. I'll need 10 days to arrange the funds." Prewitt looked slightly off balance, as though he had prepared for a fight and was now holding a peace offering he didn't know what to do with. Yes, that would be acceptable," he said. "I'll have my attorney draw up the settlement documentation," she said. "Good day, Mr. Prewitt." She turned and walked out. Benjamin fell into step beside her. Outside, she stopped walking and stood still for a moment, her hands steady at her sides. $460, she said. "I know," he said. "The yield from the East Field was $380. I have another $200 in reserve from the account Gerald helped me set up." She was calculating out loud. She did this when she needed to hear the numbers rather than just see them. "I'll need to defer one of the barn repairs." "I can cover the barn repair," Benjamin said. She looked at him. "As a neighbor," he said quickly. "Not as—" "No," she said. "Thank you, but no." She held his gaze. "I need to do this myself." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. "All right," he said. "But I want you to know the offer stands, not as charity, as—" He paused, found the word partnership. She looked at him. Partnership. Not rescue. Not management. Not protection. Partnership. "I know the difference," she said. "I know you do," he said. Netting. Calloway arrived from Richmond by the following Tuesday. He reviewed Prewitt's documents, confirmed Abigail's assessment, with exactly 2 additional observations she hadn't considered, and had the settlement papers drawn within 3 days. She paid the $460 from her own accounts, deferred the barn repair, and wrote to Gerald Whitmore with the final accounting of the estate. Gerald's reply came back promptly. "The estate of Robert Hale is now fully settled. The property is yours clear and complete with no remaining claims. I want to say, and I say this having known your grandfather, who was a complicated man with more enemies than friends, and more regret than he ever knew how to express, that I think he would have been glad it went to you. Not because you share his blood, but because of what you did with it. He valued people who didn't flinch. G. Whitmore." She read it twice. Then she put it in her writing case, next to the 2.5 pages of questions from the beginning of all this. Then she went out to find Samuel, because she had promised him a new book, and she had not forgotten. December arrived, and with it Eleanor, not her aunt, though her aunt wrote regularly, warm and dry and exactly herself, always ending her letters with a brief, unapologetic inquiry about the neighbor. Eleanor the baby, in the arms of Charlotte Whitmore Carter, who arrived at the Hale property on the first Wednesday of the month in a hired coach with a single trunk, and the expression of a woman who has rehearsed what she is going to say so many times that she can no longer remember which version she planned to lead with. Abigail had known she was coming. She had said yes in a letter, confirmed it in a second letter, and had nonetheless spent the morning of Charlotte's arrival doing accounts she didn't need to do because it gave her hands something to occupy. Martha had made coffee and then found pressing business in the far barn. The coach came up the drive at 11 o'clock. Abigail went to the door. Charlotte stepped down first. She was thinner than Abigail remembered, and something had changed in her face. The brightness that had always been her most defining feature was still there, but quieter now, less performed. She held the baby against her shoulder with the careful confidence of a new mother who has learned through trial what actually works. They looked at each other across the yard. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Charlotte said, "The East Field." Abigail blinked. "What? Father told me about it. 11% above projection." Charlotte's voice was careful. He said it like he'd done it himself. Something moved in Abigail's chest, not quite a laugh, but close. "He's allowed to," she said. "He worries enough about it." Charlotte smiled. Small, tentative, not the broad, performative smile Abigail remembered. Something more honest than that. "May I come in?" Charlotte said. "Yes," Abigail said. "Come in." They sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the baby between them in a basket that Charlotte had brought and Eleanor named for the aunt they both loved. This small new person who had Robert Hale's nose and George Whitmore's forehead, and Abigail thought possibly her own mother's eyes, slept with the authoritative ease of someone who had not yet learned that the world could be difficult. Charlotte talked first because Charlotte had always talked first. But it was different now. She was not filling silence. She was trying to cross it, and there was a marked and genuine difference between those two things. She talked about the baby, about the early weeks when she hadn't slept, and Nathaniel had sat up with her at 3 in the morning, and they had both been frightened in a way that had paradoxically made her feel closer to him than anything prior. She talked about the way Eleanor had looked at her that morning. Charlotte had written about the look that made her want to become someone worth being looked at that way. She did not mention Virginia. She did not mention the investor group. She did not mention what Nathaniel had told her. And then she did. "He told me what he went there to do," she said, quietly, "and what he did instead." Abigail waited. "I didn't know," Charlotte said. "About the investor group. I knew about the business in Virginia, but not the details. Not that it was your land." She looked at the baby. "When he told me, I asked him how long he'd known it was yours. He said since the week before the gathering at the Bryce farm." Abigail absorbed this. A week before the gathering. The same week Benjamin had warned her. "He came to warn you," Charlotte said. "I want you to know that I believe that. Not because I have to, but because I know him well enough now to know when he's telling the truth." She paused. "He's not a good man in the way you deserve a good man. But he's not the man I thought he was either. He's something in between. I think he always was." Abigail looked at her sister. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because I don't want anything between us to be built on half-truths anymore," Charlotte said. "I did that for 3 years, and I know what it costs." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. They were clasped together on the table, the knuckles slightly white. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm not asking you to forgive him ever if that's not something you can do. I wanted you to know everything, all of it. So that whatever we are to each other from here, it's built on what's real." The kitchen was very quiet. Eleanor made a small sound in her basket and then settled. Abigail looked at her niece. At the Robert Hale nose, and the George Whitmore forehead, and the possibly her mother's eyes. Then she looked at her sister. "Charlotte," she said, "I forgave you a long time ago. Not all at once. In pieces over months when I wasn't paying attention." She paused. "What I couldn't do was trust you. Those are different things." "I know," Charlotte said. "I don't know when I'll trust you again," Abigail said. "I don't know if it'll be the same kind of trust we had before, because I think we were different people before, and I don't want to be that person again." She met her sister's eyes. "But I'm willing to find out what we can build from here," If you are. Charlotte held her gaze. Her eyes were very bright. Yes, she said. I am. Abigail reached across the table and briefly covered her sister's clasped hands with her own. One moment, firm and clear. Then she released them and said, "Tell me about the baby. Is she sleeping yet? And don't lie to me." Charlotte let out a breath that broke in the middle. Then she laughed, real unguarded, slightly desperate, the laugh of a woman who has not laughed honestly in quite some time. "No," she said. "Absolutely not." Charlotte stayed 4 days. They did not solve everything. Abigail had known they wouldn't and had stopped expecting it. What they did was exist in the same house, eat at the same table, walk the east field together on the second morning while Eleanor slept and Thomas kept a polite and scrupulous distance, and talk, not about Nathaniel, not about Boston, not about the 3 years that couldn't be undone, but about ordinary things. Their father. Their mother's garden, which neither of them had ever been able to keep alive. The way Eleanor scrunched her face before she cried, exactly like a Whitmore, Charlotte said, and Abigail had agreed before she could stop herself. On the last evening, Charlotte said, "Tell me about Benjamin Ashford." Abigail looked at her across the table. "Who told you?" she said. "Father," Charlotte said. "He said you mentioned a neighbor. He said you said he was a good man. He said you said it in a particular way." She looked at her. Father has never in his life noticed when a person is speaking in a particular way about anything, so I figured it must have been very particular indeed. Abigail was quiet for a moment. Then she told her. Not everything, some things were too new and too hers to share yet, but enough. The stage, the fence line, the gathering. The way he came by with practical reasons that were not the actual reason. The school. Charlotte listened without interrupting, which was not something she had historically been good at. When Abigail finished, Charlotte said, "He built the school for you." "He planned it before he met me," Abigail said. "He built it with you," Charlotte said. "There's a difference." She looked at her sister. "Is he going to ask you to marry him?" "I don't know," Abigail said. "Do you want him to?" A pause. The kind of pause that is itself an answer. "Yes," Abigail said. Simply. Charlotte looked at her for a long moment. And then she said softly, "Good. You deserve someone who sees you." It was the most honest thing her sister had ever said to her. She didn't trust her voice to answer. She just nodded once. Benjamin asked her on the 22nd of December, not at the kitchen table. Not in any of the practical work-adjacent settings where they had spent most of their time together. He came to the property at dusk, which was unusual, and he had left his horse at the gate and walked up the drive on foot, which was also unusual. And when she opened the door, he was standing there with his hat in his hands and the clear, cold December sky behind him, and the expression of a man who has decided something absolutely. "Abigail," he said. "Benjamin," she said. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want to ask it plainly without—" He stopped. "I am not a man who says things easily. You know that by now." "I know," she said. "I am going to say this one," he said. He looked at her directly the way he had looked at her on the stage and on the fence line and at every moment in between that had mattered. "I am asking you to marry me. Not because you need someone you don't. Not because the property would be simpler managed jointly, it would, but that's not why. Not because I'm lonely, though I have been, and I won't pretend otherwise." He paused. "I'm asking because you are the most clear-eyed person I have ever known. Because watching you build this life has been because I don't want to watch it from the other side of a fence line anymore. I want to be in it with you. As an equal. Always as an equal." His voice was steady, but just barely. "That's all I have to say. It's not a speech. It's just the truth." She stood in the doorway and looked at this man who had waited and warned her and held her hand over a map of a school they were going to build, and sent a rider to Richmond before she even knew there was a problem, and come back every single time with something useful to offer and nothing to demand. She thought of the girl who had set down her flowers on the church steps and walked away while the bells rang for someone else. She thought of what that girl had needed then and what she needed now, and how different those two things were. She thought of Eleanor's porch, of the east field, of Samuel's face, of Charlotte's hands clasped on the table, of a note in a coat pocket that said, "The fence line will wait, and so will everything else." "Yes," she said. "Benjamin, yes." He exhaled. It came out ragged and completely unguarded, the sound of a man releasing something he had held very carefully for a very long time. Then he stepped forward, and she stepped forward, and he held her, not dramatically, not with performance, just firmly, and with complete honesty, and she held him back. They stood in the doorway of her house on her land, in the cold December air, and the sky above the east field was going dark, and the first stars were coming out, and everything that had happened to bring her here felt in this moment not like suffering that had finally ended, but like a road that had always been leading somewhere true. They married in April, when the east field was planted. It was a small ceremony. Judge Pratt officiated. Catherine Holloway stood as witness. Martha wept with complete composure into a handkerchief. She had clearly prepared for this purpose. And Thomas and Will and Eli and Samuel stood at the edge of the yard in their good coats, with the solemn, pleased expressions of men who have watched something difficult become something good. George Whitmore came from Boston. He walked slowly and kneaded Thomas's arm on the uneven ground, but he walked, and when he embraced his daughter before the ceremony, he held on long enough that she felt the full weight of everything he couldn't say, and she held on long enough to let him know she understood. Eleanor, her aunt, not the baby, sent a letter that arrived the morning of the wedding, 3 pages long, ending with, "I knew from the moment you came to my farm that you were not a woman who was finished. I am very glad you knew it too." Charlotte came. She stood at the edge of the gathering with the baby on her hip and kept her distance with a consideration that was itself a kind of love. And when Abigail caught her eye across the yard, Charlotte raised her chin, the smallest degree, not a greeting exactly, but an acknowledgement, a recognition. "We are here, and it is different from how it was, and that is not nothing." Abigail raised her chin in return. The school opened in September of 1816. 31 children on the first day, from 9 families along the Creek Road and the North Ridge. Benjamin had designed the building with Thomas's help. Solid, simple, more windows than anyone thought strictly necessary, which had been Abigail's very firm requirement. The library room held 40 books on opening day, and was promised 60 more by spring courtesy of a donation campaign that Catherine Holloway had organized with characteristic efficiency and without being asked. Samuel taught the youngest children. He had not expected to be asked. When Abigail offered him the position, he stared at her for a long moment and then said, "I've only been reading for a year." "A year and a half," she said. "And you know something that most trained teachers don't." "What?" he said. "What it felt like before you could," she said. "That's worth more than a certificate." He started the following Monday. The adult evening sessions drew 8 people in the first week and 14 by the third. Abigail taught 2 evenings herself and organized the rest, and on the nights she taught, she came home with the particular tiredness that is not depletion, but its opposite. The tiredness of having given something that mattered and having seen it received. Benjamin was always awake when she got home. He would have coffee ready and a question about the session, not a polite question, a real one. The kind that showed he had been thinking about what she'd told him from the previous week. They would sit at the table and talk until the fire burned low, and then they would go to bed, and in the morning they would get up and start again. This was their life, built from scratch on chosen ground between 2 people who had each learned the hard way that patience without discernment was just another word for waiting, and that the only thing worth waiting for was something you were also willing to build. A letter came from Charlotte in the spring of 1817. She was well. Eleanor was walking early, Charlotte said, which she reported with the startled pride of a woman who is discovering that her child has opinions about timeline. Nathaniel had left the investor group. He had taken a position with a shipping firm that required straightforward documented work, which Charlotte described without editorial comment, but with a clarity that told Abigail everything she needed to know about what their marriage was becoming. At the end of the letter, Charlotte wrote, "I took Eleanor to see Mother's grave last week. I don't know why exactly. I just wanted her to know where she came from. I told her about mother. I told her about father. And then I told her about you, about the farm, and the school, and the woman you became when no one was watching. I know she's too young to understand it. But I wanted to say it out loud, somewhere that mattered. You became someone extraordinary, Abigail. Not because of what happened to you. In spite of it. That's the harder thing, and you did it. I think Mother would have said so too. Abigail read the letter at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, while the coffee was still hot, and she let herself feel everything in it, all of it, without managing it, or containing it, or deciding in advance what it meant. She felt the grief of the years it had taken to get here, and the complicated tenderness for her sister, and the ache of her mother's absence, and the very particular warmth of being known by someone who had once failed to see her and had come slowly and honestly to look again. She sat with it for a long time. Then she heard the back door open and Benjamin's voice calling to Thomas about the north field, and the ordinary sounds of the morning she had built settled around her like something solid and true. She folded Charlotte's letter, put it in the writing case, the same case she had carried from Boston on a stage heading west, the same case that held Eleanor's porch letters, and Gerald's accounting, and Calloway's final settlement, and the 2.5 pages of questions she had brought into this life, when all she had was the courage to ask them. She got up. She poured a second cup of coffee. She went to the back door and said to her husband, who turned at the sound of her voice, with the unhurried, genuine pleasure that had not diminished in 2 years of mornings, "The north field can wait an hour. Come have coffee." He looked at her. "Everything all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Everything is exactly right." He came up the steps, passed her in the doorway, touched her hand briefly as he passed, the small, unremarkable gesture of a man who is precisely where he wants to be. She followed him in. The door closed behind them. Outside, the April morning was opening up over the east field, the same field she had walked in her first frightened week and counted in her first proud autumn, and worked through every season since, and it was green now fully, and without apology, the way living things become when they are finally growing in the right ground. There are women who wait their whole lives for someone to tell them who they are, and there are women who walk away from the church steps with steady hands and go out and find out for themselves. Abigail Whitmore Ashford had been both at different times. She did not regret either. The waiting had taught her what she did not want. The walking away had shown her what she could become. And the building, the daily chosen, unspectacular work of building a life on ground that was hers, had given her the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Not rescue. Not redemption handed to her by someone else's recognition. Just herself fully arrived on her own terms. That was enough. That had always been enough. She had simply needed the room to discover it.